Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Narayanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Narayanaya. Shuklambaradharam Vishnum Sasivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavadanam Dhyayet Sarvavighnopashantaye Ananta Samsara Samudratara Naukaitabhyam Guru Bhaktitabhyam Vairagya Samrajyata Pujanabhyam Namo Namah Shri Guru Padukabhyam Anjananandanam Veeram Janaki Shokanashanam Kapīsamukshahamtaram Vande Lankābhayankaram Krishnāya Vāsudevāya Devakī Nandanāya Ca Nandagopakumārāya Govindāya Namo Namaha Govindāya Namo Govindāya Namo Namaha Yadangri Pankeru Harenu Lagnam Nipiyaniram Vimalantarangaha Janami Tattvam Nijamatmarupam Janami Tattvam Nijamatmarupam Tam Naumi Narayana Tirthamaryam Tam Naumi Narayana Tirthamaryam. Namaskaram, all of you. Welcome to the 55th session of Krishna Leela Tarangini. We saw in sessions 51, 52, and 53 Krishna's Vedanta Satyam, which he preached to his favorite devotees, the blessed Gopîs, as Gopi Gita in the form of Tirtha's Gitam with 20 stanzas highlighting Vedanta from 6 different Upanishads. In the last session, we saw Gopis' benedictions, which were equally noteworthy for Vedantic interpretations, that their Krishna is in fact the Brahman, as coming from Gopis in their conversations amongst themselves. The first in the series was a Ragamala, Paramiha Pashyata Purusham Saki Svikrita Maika Manusham. It was a gentle benediction saying, behold here the divine Lord, who is amidst us now, taking the form of a Yadava boy. We then listen to the third Gitam in Tarangam 7, Kalaye Devamiha Sukha Kandam, but did not enjoy the interpretation as Tirtha packed it with choice terms and phrases which required quite some elaboration. Another benediction by yet another Gopi in the ecstasy of supreme bliss. Tirtha has cast a rendition in the Dvitiya Vibhakti or the accusative case. We will just now listen to the Ragamala and then go stanza by stanza to analyze and review the meaning.
கலயதேவமிக சுககந்தம் கலயதேவமிக சுககந்தம் நிகம நிகூட அகில திருஷ நிகம நிகூட அகில திருஷம் ஏகரசம் व्रज आनंद मुकुंदो कलय देवमिग सुखगंधम निगम निगूढ़म अखिल दृशम एकरसम व्रज आनंद मुकुंदो कृष्णो कलय देवमिग सुखगंधम கலையே தேவமிக சுககந்தம் யதசனயாதி விகாரவிஹீனம் யதசனயாதி விகாரவிஹீனம் जनयादि विकार विहीनम् अशेषम् अजय्यम् अनन्तम् इगमुदयो मृगयन्ति समाधिभिः इगमुदयो त्रिभिरान्तरमेन अचिन्त्यो इगमुनयो मृगयन्ति समाधिभिरान्तरमेन अचिन्त्यो कृष्ण कलये देवमिग सुखगन्धं कृष्णं कलये देवमिग सुखगन्धम् इग परभोगममर पदवीमपि यदधिगमेन भजन्ते विषमिव धीरधियोमरमृग्य परैगसुगे विगरन्ते विषमिव धीरधियोमरमृग्य परैगसुगे विगरन्ते निखिलतप शुदयोनुवदन्ति यमविदशया परदेवतम् निखिलतप शुदयोनुवदन्ति यमविदशया परदेवतम् अभिलाषितं मुनिभिस्वतपोभिरचेषभवाम्बुधि नावम् अभिलाषितं मुनिभिस्वतपोभिरचेषभवाम्बुधि नावम् सकल सुधर्म विधर्म कृता कृत भूत भविष्यत् अतीतम् सकल सुधर्म विधर्म कृता कृत भूत भविष्यत् अतीतम् निज परिभ्रमित जगदनुकूल तया सततं सुविभातं निज परिभ्रमित जगदनुकूल तया सततं सुविभातं यदधिकम् आदिग जन्म भृतिगण नादि भव्यानि तरन्ति यदधिकम् आदिग ஜன்மமிருதி கணனாதி பவ்யானி தரந்தி புனரிகமோக விஜும்பிதமேததோ முனயோ ந பஜந்தி புனரிகமோக விஜும்பிதம் தததோ முனயோ ந பஜந்தி प्रणवतुरीय सुलक्षितमक्षरम् आत्मदया यदनन्यं प्रणवतुरीय सुलक्षितमक्षरम् आत्मदया यदनन्यं यदयमनुस्मरति स्वयमव्ययमासु सविन्दति धन्यं यदयमनुस्मरति स्वयमव्ययम् आसु सविन्दति धन्यम् विरति समाधि विहीन दूरापम बोध सुबोध समानम विरति समाधि विहीन दूरापम बोध सुबोध समानम यदवगति प्रतिषिद्धमबोध विजृम्भितम् आगुरिगैन यदवगति प्रतिषिद्धमबोध विजृम्भितमागुरिगैन यदवगति प्रतिषिद्धमबोध विजृम्भितमागुरिगैनम् यदवगति प्रतिषिद्धमबोध विजृम्भितमागुरिगैन विभुम शरीर मशेष शरीर मृगासु निवेट निदंसम् विभुम शरीर अशेष शरीर मृगासु निवेट चिदंसम् व्रजयुवती जनवल्लभमात्मतया परिचिष्टम् अधीशम् व्रजयुवती जनवल्लभमात्मतया परिचिष्टम् अधीशम् व्रजयुवती जनवल्लभमात्मतया परिचिष्टम् अधीशम् व्रजयुवती जनवल्लभमात्मतया परिचिष्टम् अधीशम् बणितम् अनंत परायण शिवनारायण तीर्थे निवेदम् गणितम् अनंत परायण शिवनारायण तीर्थे वेदम् निगम शिरोरस भावनया गतमत्तर हृदय विनोदम् निगम शिरोरस भावनया गतमत्तर हृदय विनोद कलये 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 देवमिग सुखगन्धं कृष्ण कलये देवमिग सुखगन्धं कृष्ण कलये देवमिग सुखगन्धं
கலையே தேவமிகு சுககண்டம் நிகம நிகூடம் Akiladrisam Ekarasam Vraja Ananda Mukundam Kalaye. Nigama Nigudam means hidden in the scriptures. Another text is Nigama Nirudham. This is also a variation there in some other books. Nigama Nirudham, celebrated by the scriptures. But for our purposes, we would say Nigama Nigudam because that's hidden. There is a less known and rare small Upanishad known as Brahma Bindu Upanishad and often referred to as Amrita Bindu Upanishad, which we had already touched upon in one of the earlier Narayaniyam sessions. That Upanishad is very, very small. It is just 22 slokams. The final slokas, 18 to 22, talk about the greatness of the hidden secret in Vedas. Grantham Abhyasya Medhavi Jnana Vijnana Tattvataha Palalamiva Dhanyarti Tejed Grantham Aseshataha. After studying the books or scriptures in a way so as to understand the truths of spiritual knowledge and wisdom, the wise one should give up the books just as one desirous of eating corn deliberately throws away the husk and the cob. Similar to that, you study the books and scriptures all right, but in a way to understand the truths of spiritual knowledge and wisdom. Only use them as equipment. They are not the ultimate goal. Your goal is to understand the Nigudartham of Nigama. Gavam Aneka Varnanam Kshirasyapi Eka Varnata Kshiravat Pashyate Jnanam Linginastu Gavam Yatha. So there is an analogy given here. So something to explain such a profound statement that in order to understand the hidden secrets of Vedas, one should read the scriptures all right, but they are not the summum bonum because the goal is something else. What is hidden in Vedas is Brahman. In order to understand, you need to shed all the husk and cob. So then the analogy given here is Gavam Aneka Varnanam Shirasyapi Eka Varnata. The milk of various cows of different stripes and colors and types in a cattle shed. When the milk is actually milked upon from various cows, ultimately they are put in the same barrel or container. Because all of them are uniformly white, the characteristics of milk are uniform, even though they are coming from different cows of different colors and breed and whatnot. Similarly, the self-knowledge, jnanam contained and enunciated by various scriptural books is the same or identical. Kshiravat Pashyate Jnanam Linginastu Gavam Yata. How? Gavam Aneka Varnanam Kshirasyapi Eka Varnata. Dhritamiva Payasi Nigudam Bhute Bhute Cha Vasati Vijnanam Satatam Mantayitavyam Manasa Mantana Bhutena. Wisdom in the form of self lies hidden or concealed in every living being, just like ghee or butter is hidden in milk. First we take milk and the milk is then converted into yogurt often, or sometimes even people take butter right from the milk itself by a special process. So the butter is hidden inside the milk. And from butter comes the ghee. That's what this Upanishad Vakyam, the 20th sloka says, Dhritam iva payasi nigudam bhute bhute cha vasati vijnanam. So ghee or butter is hidden. This is also nigudam. Jnana netram samadhaye choddaret vannivat param. Nishkalam nischalam chantam tad brahmaham iti smritam. One should always churn the milk in order to obtain butter with the churning stick. Correct? That's a good example. But what is the churning stick? Churning stick is the mind. And that should be the one which should be churning in order to get knowledge. Because with every churning, with the stirrings of knowledge, you get more knowledge and the wisdom takes you to the highest level of intellect. Thus, after having obtained the butter, normally we heat it in the fire of yoga to get ghee. By doing so, one will realize, I am that very Brahman, which is one, indivisible, stainless, and peaceful. In other words, we started with accumulating all the bookish knowledge, then understanding that, putting the wisdom to take it to the intellectual level. And from that level, we started making further understanding. We put it to the heat and fire of yoga to get the final essence. That essence is transformation of the knowledge that you gain from the bookish level, understanding it that I am that very Brahman is the final stage. Jnana netram samadaya chudared vannivat param nishkalam nishchalam shantam tad brahmaham iti smritam. Finally, Amrita Upanishad finishes with the final stanza. Sarva bhuta adivasam cha yad bhuteshu vasatyapi sarva anugrahatvena tadasyaham vasudevaha tadasyaham vasudeva iti. Being favorable to and one to all, I am that who is there in every living being and in whom are all universal beings in creation. So Brahman is in everything. It's up to us to understand that the Brahman is within me, and when that understanding comes, you are none else than Brahman himself or itself. In chapter 7, the 7th sloka, he says, Matta parataram na anyate kinchiti asti dhananjaya mai sarvamidam protam sutre manigana iva. Krishna says there exists nothing greater than or apart from me. Everything that is exists like gem beads formed into a thread. But whereas when we go to verse 4 of chapter 9, it acts as the counterpoint for the 7th sloka of 7th chapter of its very same Bhagavad Gita. Because 7th chapter says, Matta parataram na anyate kinchiti asti dhananjaya mai sarvamidam protam sutre manigana iva. But 2 chapters down the line, he says, Maya tadamidam sarvam jagat avyakta murtina matstani sarva bhutani nachaham teshu avastitaha. Here Krishna says the entire universe is pervaded by me in undifferentiated form. All beings rest in my place, but I am not present in them. These 2 verses may appear to contradict on the topic of Bhagavan's immanence. Does the Lord dwell in everything or does he not? That will be the confusion that we will have. However, they make a profound statement about both the Lord's immanence in everything as well as his transcendence by being apart from everything. He is in everything, but he is also being apart from everything. That is how these 2 slokas distinguish, so that you understand Brahman is within you, Brahman is also a part of you, outside of you. So in order for you to understand that Brahman, you have to become Brahman. Brahman has no physical link here. Narana Tirtha clarifies all of these by stanza 1 through Gopîs, that he is beyond human thought and description, as we appreciated in the last session, Mano Vakyam Anatita. We saw how this kind is Mano Vakyam Anatita, one who is beyond thought and description. That's what was clarified by Tirtha in stanza 1. Yadasanayadi vikara vihinam asesham ajayam anantam iga munayo mrughayanti samadhibihi antaramenam achintyam. I contemplate on Bhagavan Krishna, who is free from changes brought about by hunger, etc. Because Bhagavan is perfect, he doesn't have any residue. He is invincible. He is without end. He is beyond human thought, and whom the sages seek to know by self-control and all other means. Samadhi bihi. That is the special word that Tirtha uses in the very first stanza. Iha munayo mrughayanti samadhi bihi antaramenam achintyam. Ananta is also explained by scholars as Sarvaswarupi, one who takes all forms. The pramana for the first part of this sloka is Yada Sanayadi Vikara Vihinam, seems to be from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Yo Asanayapi Pase Shaukam Moham Jaram Mrityu Mutyeti Etam Vai Tatma Atmanam Viditva. Let us amplify the stanza. Krishna Paramatma is free from hunger, thirst, grief, and desire. He is invincible, cannot be understood unless the seeker knows definitively that the body, hunger, and other urges are nothing but a myth. Distractions are non-existent. In this world, in this body, in this mind, the sages who have mastered the methods of Samadhi are imperishable witnesses to the ultimate Satyam or truth known as Krishna. So, Samadhi is a coinage which we use. Why is it so particularly relevant here? Shama means mind control. Dama is control of the body and senses. Uparati is sannyasya. So, of the three controls, ultimately, final thing is Uparati, sannyasa. This implies a state of mind which is above and beyond all dualities, such as joy and grief, liking and disliking, good and bad, praise and blame, that which agitate and affect the common man. Beyond the Shama, Dhamma, and Uparati or sannyasa, there is something which is known as Titiksha. Titiksha is the power of endurance. This is the attitude of forbearance which refuses to be affected or pained when afflicted with sorrow and loss, and the ingratitude and wickedness of others. Everything can be forgiven and purely by enduring it without affecting yourself. That is Titiksha, the power of endurance. And there is another aspect to it, Shraddha. Shraddha is the fifth part. In the Samadhi Sama, Dhamma, Uparati, Titiksha, the fifth comes Shraddha. That means unwavering faith in the sacred scriptures or Shastras and in the moral codes they contain, as well as in the Atma and the Guru. And finally, Samadhi. Samadhi is Samadhana, single-pointed concentration by surrendering the wandering mind unto the Brahman. That's a very tough thing. One may have Shama, they may attain Dhamma, they can also reach Uparati or Sannyasa, they can get Titiksha, and they can put more and more Shraddha into the whole concept. But getting the Samadhana or the ultimate level of Samadhi or absolute focus by Sharanagati of the wandering mind unto the Brahman is the highest state to be attained. That's the stage after which you identify with Brahman and you feel that you are none else than Brahman itself. Samadhana comes from the past tendencies which have been carried by us during this birth. Samadhana will increase the power of discrimination, and increased power of discrimination in turn will further foster Samadhana. Shraddha and Samadhana will help achieve Titiksha. So if you want to just go back in a reverse order, Samadhana comes from past tendencies, all right, but Samadhana increases power of discrimination, which in turn will further foster Samadhana. And along with Samadhana, Shraddha, put together these two will help achieve Titiksha. Titiksha is power of endurance. And the Titiksha, or the power of endurance, bestows Uparati, namely Sannyasa, or detachment. And Uparati in turn will cause Dhamma. What is Dhamma? Control of the body and senses. When you reach that stage of Sannyasa, you can get Dhamma, or control of the body and senses, which ultimately bring about Shama, which is tranquil mind or mind control. These six come under the Sadhana Chatushtaya. We have seen earlier some samples from Adi Shankara Bhagavad-pada's Viveka Chodamani. Adau Nitya Anintya Vastu Vivekaha Parigamyate Ihamutra Phalavoga Viragaha Tadanantaram Samadhi Shatka Sampattihi Mumukshatvam Iti Sputam. This is Viveka Chodamani, 19th sloka. Adau Nitya Anitya Vastu Vivekaha Parigamyate. First is enumerated discrimination between the real and the unreal. Ihamutra Phalabhoga Viragaha Tadanantaram. Next comes aversion to the enjoyment of fruits of one's own actions. And thereafter, Samadhi Shatka Sampattihi. Next comes a group of 6 attributes, namely calmness and the rest. And the last is clearly the yearning for liberation. Mumukshutvam iti sputam. What is the expansion of the Samadhi Shatka Sampattihi? A collective group of 6 behavioral traits which form part of the four-step preparatory process known as sadhana chatushtaya. Those four are viveka, which is discrimination of real from unreal, vairagya, detachment or dispassion from sense objects, samadhi shatka sampattihi, of 6 behavioral traits which we saw extensively just now, and finally, mumukshatva, intense desire to achieve permanent bliss. If the sages already know how to use their knowledge to merge onto Brahman, why go through these elaborate practices? The answer for this is, which is also an indirect question from Tirtha in the stanza 1, was provided by Sukamuni in Srimad Bhagavatam through Brahmastuti. In fact, in Dasamaskandam, 14th chapter, 28th sloka, Sukha provides the answer. You may remember we saw earlier in the context when Brahma in his arrogance played with little Krishna by hiding the entire entourage of Krishna, namely the cows, calves and the boys, etc., etc. But in the end, he learned a lesson when Brahma attempted to replicate everything and how Brahma was humbled by Krishna when he created a parallel universe and nothing happened to anybody. Nobody felt there was any change, whereas Krishna created another universe. Finally, that's what taught Brahma the final lesson of humility. That is how Brahma, who was humbled, did an elaborate stuti. The sloka 28 of the chapter 14 is very pertinent here. Antarbhave ananta bhavantameva hyatati yajanto mrigayanti santaha asantam api antyahi mantarena santam gunam tam kimuyanti santaha. Antarbhave ananta bhavantameva. O unlimited Lord, you have no limit. There is no end to you. There is no beginning. And there is no conditioning. The saintly devotees seek you out within their own bodies. They don't have to go elsewhere. They find the Brahman inside. By rejecting everything that is separate from you, that's how they finally find themselves as Brahman. Indeed, how can discriminating persons appreciate the real nature of a rope lying before them until they refute the illusion that it is a snake? Asantam api antyehi mantarena santam gunam tam kimuyanti santaha. One may argue that a person should cultivate self-realization and at the same time pursue sense gratification for the material body. This proposition is herein refuted by the example of misidentifying a rope as a snake. One who mistakes a rope for a snake becomes fearful and thinks of the so-called snake. But upon discovering that the so-called snake is actually a rope, he experiences a different emotion. That emotion is nothing but relief and can then ignore the rope. Similarly, because we misunderstand the material body to be the self itself, we are experiencing many emotions in relation to the body. But upon discovering, however, that the body is simply a bag of material chemicals, we carefully note how this illusion was created and then lose interest in the body. Discovering that we are actually an eternal soul within the body, we naturally focus our attention on that real self, and that takes us to realization that we are Brahman. This was Brahma's rhetorical question forming part of his own elaborate stuti. Yadasanayadi vikara vihinam asesham ajayam anantam Ihamunayo mrugayanti samadhibihi antaramenam achintyam. This is what Tirtha said through the Gopîs, and all of this, all the pieces which we talked about fall into a single stanza. That's the purpose of why Tirtha brought this whole stanza. In the next stanza, Tirtha says, Iha parabhogam amara padavimapi yadhadi game na bhajante vishamiva dhira diyo amara mrugya paraika suke viharante. The steadfast of mind on attaining the knowledge of Supreme does not care for the pleasures of the world or anything else, and even for the padavi of what Devas say, Amara Padavi, treating them as poison. If someone has an understanding of the Supreme and who possesses the knowledge of Supreme or in the path of possessing that knowledge, to that person, even the status of being a Deva is nothing but poison because it's enticing. Instead, those great Mahatmas revel in Bhagavan the unique supreme state of bliss whom even Devas seek. Because when Devas themselves are seeking only that Padavi, why should somebody settle for some intermediary Padavi like Deva Padavi? In the third stanza, Tirtha says, Nikila tapaha shrutayonu vadanti yamavaditaya paradevatam abhilashitam munibihi swatapobhira sesha bhavam budhinavam. He, the Brahman, here Paramatma Krishna, is beyond such concepts as good and evil, action and inaction, past and future. He is forever shining, rising, taking on incarnations to be for the benefit of the world created by him. That's why he comes again and again in one incarnation or the other. What is the background of this statement and why Tirtha brought this particular aspect of repeated reincarnations? Shrotayo anuvadanti yam avaditaya paradevatam abhilashitam munibihi swatapobhira shesha bhavam budhinavam. What's the pramanam for this? The nearest we can get it is from Kathopanishad. On the very first chapter, second Anuvaka, 14th sloka. Anyatra dharmat, anyatra adharmat, anyatra asmat krita kritat, anyatra bhutasya bhavyasya yattat pasyachi tadvada. This was actually a question and answer. Nachiketas asked Dharmaraja, that which you see as other than righteousness and unrighteousness, other than all this cause and effect, other than what has been and what is to be, can you please tell me that? In fact, Nachiketa's question is, what is that? What is that? Eventually, he is going to say Brahman, that which you see other than righteousness and unrighteousness. Shankara Bhashya for this is what Shankara writes as Nachiketas requesting Dharmaraja. Oh Bhagavan, if I am worthy, if you are pleased with me, Nachiketas continues, other than virtue, namely, different from the performance of acts enjoined by the Shastras, their fruits and their requisites, and similarly from vice, other than what is made, that is effect, and what is not made, namely the cause, and again other than the past, that is time gone by, and the future, that is time yet to come, and similarly the present, what is not conditioned by time, past, present, and future. If you see or know anything exists like that, beyond the reach of all worldly experience, oh Dharmaraja, can you tell me that? That was the question of Nachiketas. Tell me about that. Of course, Tirtha doesn't answer that straight away there, like in Kathopanishad, but he goes further to the stanza 4, where indirectly tries to answer. Sakala sudharma vidharma krita krita bhuta bhavishyat atitam nija paribhrahmita jagat anukulataya satatam suvibhatam. All the scriptures and canons of penance declare him to be the ultimate, the supreme Lord, who is sought after by the sages through their own penance, and who is the sole ferry across the ocean of moral existence, because he is the conduit to get over the Bhavasagara. Sakala sudharma vidharma kritakrita bhuta bhavishyat atitam nija paribhrahmita jagat anukulataya satatam suvibhatam. There again, the pramanam for Tirtha's fourth stanza is again coming from Kathopanishad. The second chapter of Pratama Anuvaka to Sloka 15. Sarve Veda yatpadam amananti tapamsi sarvani cha yad vadanti yadichanto brahmacharyam charanti tatte padam sangrahena bravimi om ityetat. This is the pramanam for the stanza we just now saw from Tirtha. The Gopîs says that there is no other ferry available to cross the Bhavasagara than Krishna. That was a simplistic answer or summary for the stanza 4. But that Kathopanishad gives a huge Vyakyanam. Sarve Veda yatpadam amananti tapamsi sarvani cha yat vadanti. The goal which all the Vedas uniformly extol, which all acts of tapas speak of, and wishing for which men lead the life of a brahmacharin to attain the Brahman. Somebody who is in the process of attaining Brahman, who does everything to attain Brahman. That goal I tell you briefly. It is this, Om. The goal is, Yadichanto brahmacharyam charanti tatte padam sangrahena bravimi Om ityetat. It is this Om, and that is Brahman, and the Gopis said that is Krishna. Because this is exactly what Krishna said in those 20 stanzas which we saw earlier. Gopi Gita, he is talking about, he will talk about all Vedasaram and finally come and say, if you cannot understand that, understand Om, because Om is me. Once you understand Om and me to be one and the same, I am the Brahman. Don't be confused. So it is in a reverse order now. The Gopi says that, and Gopi said that the Pramanam that Tirtha gives is from Kathopanishad. Mukundamala is a magnum opus offering by Kulasekara Alvar. We talked about this earlier. Kulasekara Alvar was believed to have lived in the 9th century of Common Era. Reportedly, he was the 7th of the 12 Alvars. Kulasekara was one of the earliest Chera ruler of Kodungallur or Mahodayapura in the modern day Kerala. Kulasekara Peruman pleads to Mukunda or Sri Krishna to give him the freedom from samsara. The entire composition of Mukundamala describes the misery of the soul trapped in this world and exhorts that Krishna is the only means of salvation. That's the quintessence of Mukundamala. In the 11th sloka, which is very pertinent to our context here, Bhavajaladigatanam Dvandavata Ahatanam Suta Duhitru Kalatra Tranabara Ardhitanam Visham Visayatoye Majjatam Aplavanam Bhavatu Sharanam Eko Vishnupado Naranam. The people in this vast ocean of birth and death are being blown about by the winds of material dualities. As they flounder in the perilous waters of sense indulgence, with no boat to help them, they are sorely distressed by the need to protect their sons, daughters, and wives. Only the boat, that is Bhagavan Vishnu, can save them. Whenever I talk of Mukundamala, immediately the mind goes to Kunti's prayers as narrated in Srimad Bhagavatam. Vipadaha santutaha shashvatatra tatra jagadguru bhavato darshanam etsyad apunarbhava darshanam. This is the very first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 8th chapter, 25th sloka. Prayers by Queen Kunti and Parikshit in the words of Suta Pauranika, who narrates as to how Shuka talked about Srimad Bhagavatam. In that, Kunti's prayers and Parikshit prayers are highlighted. Kunti is asking, Krishna, I wish that all those calamities that you have subjected me to, which I have been witnessing from the time I was a small girl, would happen again and again and again so that I could see you again and again, protecting me again and again. For seeing you means that we will no longer see repeated births and deaths. She was so clever, saying that you will be by my side all the time. When she said that, she did not want to be born again as Kunti and go through all the pain and peril. What she meant was, Krishna, since you are with me in this birth like this, but by my seeing you constantly taking care of me, which means I have no more births or deaths. Bhavato darshanam yasyad apunarbhava darshanam. Let us see how Kulasekara says in the next slokam about the fear of Bhavasagara. In the sloka 12 of Mukundamala, Kulasekara says, Bhavajaladim aghadam dustaram nistareyam katam aham iti cheto masmagaha kataratvam. Sarasi jadrishi deve taraki bhaktihi eka narakavidi nishanna tarayishyati avasyam. Dear mind, do not bewilder yourself by anxiously thinking, how can I cross this fathomless and impassable ocean of material existence? There is one who can save you from this ocean, that is devotion. If you offer her to the lotus-eyed Lord, the killer of Narakasura, she will carry you across this ocean. Sarasija drishi deve taraki bhaktihi eka naraka bidi nishanna tarayishyati avasyam. I am once again reminded of the Avanti Brahmin's declaration, which comes towards the end of Srimad Bhagavatam in the 11th canto, chapter 23, almost towards the end of Srimad Bhagavatam, where the Avanti Brahmin, the anecdote will come to that later, he gives a profound declaration. Etamsa astaya paratma nishta madhyasitam Purvatamair Maharshibihi Aham Tarishyami Durantaparam Tamo Mukundangri Nishevayaiva. I shall cross over the insurmountable ocean of nescience by being firmly fixed in the service of the Padmapada of Bhagavan Krishna. This was approved by the previous Acharyas who were fixed in firm devotion to Bhagavan Paramatma, the Supreme Brahman. Kulasekara's final slokam in this triad is about the plea for a place in the boat of devotion which would give the passage to his feet. In the 13th sloka in Mukundamala, he says, Krishna toye madana pavana buddhuta moha urmi male dharavarte tanaya sagaja graha sanga akulecha samsara akye mahati jaladau majjatam naha tridaman padamboje varada bhavato bhakti navam prayacha. O Bhagavane, the Lord of the three worlds, we are drowning in the vast ocean of samsara, which is filled with the waters of material hankering, with many waves of illusion whipped up by the winds of lust, with whirlpools of samsara. What is that? Wives, children, daughters, and with vast schools of sharks and other sea monsters who are our sons and brothers. This doesn't mean it's always relating to wives, sons, and brothers, sisters, etc. It's the other way about. It is also addressed to women to say husbands, sons, daughters, etc., etc. In the good old times, the poetry has been made in a different manner. It shouldn't be taken as something like man has always been elevated than women. The gender has to be juxtaposed here. O giver of all benedictions, please grant me a place on the boat of devotion that is your lotus feet. Padamboje varada bhavato bhaktihi navam prayacha. Sant Meera said, Bhava sagar sab sukh gayi hai. Fikr nahi mohe taran naki. Mohi lagi lagan guru charana naki. Guru charana naki hari charana naki. Charana bina abu kachuno ki bhave. Jag maya sab sapna naki. There is another version. Jut maya sab sapna naki. This is whole. The entire thing is nothing but illusory. Meera's statement is very simple. I am wedded to my Guru's feet. Mohi lagi lagan Guru Charananiki. Nothing appeals to me except surrendering to his feet. Guru Charananiki, Hari Charananiki. The entire world seems false like an illusion or a dream. Everyone has been sucked dry by Bhavasagara, the ocean of nescience. But I have no fear of this Bhavasagara because I am wedded to my Guru's or Acharya's feet. My Guru and Acharya is none else than Giridhar. Giridhar is my Acharya. Then comes Nanatirtha's fifth slokam when he talks about the various stages. Pranavaturiya sulakshitam aksharam atmataya yadananyam yadaya manus smarati swayam abhyayamasu sabindati dhanyam. The akshara, namely Om, is best contemplated in Samadhi state. What is the ideal state for practicing Om? Samadhi. Samadhi is the fourth state of the soul in which the soul becomes one with Brahman. Of Samadhi, as contrasted with those of the first three states. Being awake, which is Jagrat, dreaming is Swapna, and sleeping is Shushupti. If you distinguish them away from Samadhi, Samadhi is the stage when you contemplate Om and then you identify yourself with Brahman. One who steadfastly and single-mindedly concentrates on this Akshara Om soon reaches the blessed real state. Mandukya Upanishad, the 12th sloka says, Amatraha avyavaharyaha prapanchopashamaha shivaha advaitaha chaturtaha evam hunkaraha atma eva yaha evam veda saha atmana atmanam samvishati. The partless, indivisible Om is Turiya. The fourth, soundless, fearless, unutterable, a quieting down of all relative manifestations, blissful, peaceful, non-dual. Thus, Om is the self, verily the self. He who knows this merges his self unto the self. He who knows thus finds the self in him. The Mandukya Upanishad, with only 12 verses, is the shortest of all Upanishads. In fact, it is even shorter than the other Upanishad which I talked about, Amrita Bindu Upanishad. Mandukya is one of the principal Upanishads, but it's only 12 stanzas or 12 verses. Yet it is said that by understanding Mandukya, just a single Upanishad, one can attain the highest reality, namely the goal of life of identification with Brahman. Therefore, It is strongly believed by saints and scholars that Sri Rama studied the Mandukya Upanishad a number of times because some of the versions of Ramayana stress this aspect of how Rama was motivated to be repeatedly studying Mandukya Upanishad. Then comes Prasnopanishad, 5th chapter, 7th Anuvaka. Rigbhiretam yajubihi antariktam samabihi yattad kavayo vedayante tam omkarenaiva ayatanenan vedi vidwan yattachantam ajaram amrutam abhayam param cheti. By Riks, this world, by Yajus, the Antariksha, and by Saman, that which the seers know in Brahmaloka, by the very aid of the letter Om, the knower reaches all of these and also that which is quiet, undecaying, deathless, fearless, and supreme. In fact, we have seen Bhagavad Gita chapter 8, sloka 13 repeated often. Om ityekaksharam brahma vyaharan mam anuswaram yat prayati tyajandeham sayati paramam gatim. After being situated in this yoga practice and vibrating the sacred syllable Om, the supreme combination of letters, if one thinks of the supreme Brahman and quits his body, he will certainly reach the highest of the spirituality, of the spiritual planets, they call it. It is clear by now that Om, Brahman, and Bhagavan Krishna are not different. They are one and the same. The impersonal sound of Krishna is Om, but the sound Hare Krishna contains Om. Hence, in Kali, the mantra of Hare Krishna is clearly recommended. So, if one quits one's body at the end of life, chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, he certainly reaches one of the spiritual planets according to the mode of his practice. The devotees of Krishna enter the Krishna planet or Goloka Vrindavana. For the personalists, there are also innumerable other planets known as Vaikuntha planets in the spiritual sky, whereas the impersonalists remain in the Brahma Jyoti because they have identified themselves to be Brahman and nothing but Brahman. Adi Shankara said, Bhaja Govindam, Govindam Bhaja Mudamate, Samprapte Sannihite Kale, Nahi Rakshati, Dukrun Karane. Worship Govinda, Govinda again, worship. O deluded mind, at the time of your death, rules of grammar will not save you. We talked about this Bhaja Govindam several times. Adi Shankara admonishes a Pandit who is constantly only reading scriptures. He says, hey, at the time of your death, the grammar is not going to help you. The scriptural grammar is not going to save you. Only Bhaja Govindam. Govinda is going to save you. So we go to the next stanza from Tirtha. He says, Yadadigam adika janma mriti hana nadi pavyani taranti punariga moga vijrumbitam etadado munayona bhajanti. Upon attaining the Brahmajnana, the knowledge of Bhagavan, the sages conquer the fears of birth, death, and destruction. The sages thereafter do not care for this base material world. It doesn't affect them anymore because the world is manifested, created only to delude. When that understanding gets into the sages, they are not bothered by the material world anymore. The 7th stanza highlights this better. Virati samadhi vihina durapama bodha subodha samanam yadava gati prati siddham abodha vijrumbitam ahuri hainam. For those bereft of renunciation and conquest of the senses, Bhagavan Krishna is difficult to attain. In his eyes, the ignorant and the learner are one and the same. They are alike. He doesn't distinguish. But on attaining him, it is said, this world, which is a manifestation of ignorance, is totally rejected. Kathopanishad says, Na virato duscharitan nashanto nasamahitaha nasanta manaso vapi prajnanenainam apnuyat. First chapter, 2nd Anuvaka, 24th sloka. No one, it starts like this. No one who has not turned away from bad conducts, whose senses are not under control, whose mind is not collected, or whose mind is not at rest, no such person can attain this Atman by knowledge. If a person has not turned away from bad actions, and if he is unable to control his senses, if his mind is not calm or collected or focused, he can never attain Brahmajnana. Tirtha continues, Vibhumma Shariram Ashesha Sarira Grihasu Nivishta Chit Amsam Braja Yuvati Jana Vallabham Atmataya Parichittam Adisham. He is the Supreme Being himself without a form. He has imbued all bodies without exception with his sparks of consciousness. He is the Bhagavan dear to the young woman of Braja, maybe the Brahman. But here now you see, he is the dearest to the young woman of Braja. Braja Yuvati Jana Vallabham Atmataya Parichittam Adisham. He pervades all with his being. He is the ultimate Lord. But still, he is dearest to the Gopis. Look at him. In Brahma Samhita, which we have seen earlier, in the 5th chapter, the very first slokam is very pertinent here. Ishvaraha Paramakrishnaha Sachidananda Vigraha Anadihi Adihi Govindaha Sarvakarana Karanam. Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme Brahman. He has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. He is the origin of everything and all. But he has no other origin. And he is the prime cause of all causes, and he can never be seen, perceived, or understood. That is Brahman. Because in order to understand him, you have to become one with him. Vanita Mananta Parayana Shiva Narayana Tirthe Niveditam Nigama Shirorasa Bhavanaya Gatam Atsara Hridaya Vinodam. Tirtha concludes that song of 9 stanzas with the 9th stanza. This song, which is the delight of those from whose hearts all basal desires have been obliterated by contemplation of the essence of the pinnacles of the scriptures, has been composed in endless devotion by Narayana Tirtha, who happens to be the disciple of Shivarama Tirtha. In other words, if you want to really understand the concept of Krishna and Gopis and why it happened and how it happened, the Rasa Leela, you need to take away from your hearts all basal desires and basal misunderstanding of the events that happened. Only when you can obliterate those basal desires and constantly contemplate on the essence of the pinnacles of the scriptures, not the essence of scriptures, but the Ragasyam or the secret of those scriptures, namely the Brahman, here Krishna, and that was composed in endless devotion by Narayana Tirtha. In the coming session, we will enjoy 2 exquisite slokams, 13 and 14, from Narayana Tirtha in Tarangam 7, which talk about the greatness of Gopis who are comparable to Akrura, since both Gopis and Akrura used identical detection techniques to find Sri Krishna when he disappears from their human vision for some time. The anecdotes and the Geetam that follows the descriptions are in a beautiful song which has been very much popularized over the last 200 years in Sankirtana Paddhati, Madhava Mamava Deva, Yadava Krishna, Yadukula Krishna. That song is very, very important because the descriptions would definitely bring us in front of our eyes how the Gopis struggled to find Krishna and what secret they had to locate him. The same way Akrura did. Let us see all of them in the next session. Narayana, 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 Narayana. Hare Krishna, Guruvayurappa, Narayana.